After traveling through time, Zhi'an discovered that the malicious sister who took her life and fortune, and ruined her reputation, was actually reborn. Zhi'an also found that as long as she met that man, her good fortune could come back a little bit. Little by little today, little by little tomorrow, I don't know if all the good luck has been sucked back. She only knows that the man's gaze at her seems a bit dangerous, and she needs to stay away from him. Zhi'an, who returned from his rebirth, believed that as long as he took away Zhi'an's fortune, he would surely be able to step on Zhi'an's head and soar 90,000 miles in his lifetime. But why is the plot different from what was imagined? Why didn't General Zhian, who died early in his previous life, die? She also became the king of Zhian, constantly surrounding her arch-rival Zhian. Even the crown prince, who has already married her, cannot forget Zhian. Why is this so? She is clearly the destined daughter in this life. Keywords of the novel. Destiny and Blessing Women. No pop-ups. Complete collection download of Destiny and Blessing Women TXT, latest chapter reading of Destiny and Blessing Women. Chapter 1. Your luck belongs to me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Your luck belongs to me. In the gloomy and cramped house of Gujia Farm in the suburbs of Beijing, the girl was tightly bound in a chair, with both wrists cut by sharp blades. Blood flowed down in a winding stream, converging into a complex pattern composed of talismans. Feeling the vitality of her body slowly fading away from her, she stared at the man and woman in front of her with reluctance and resentment, who she admired and loved for over a decade. Why do you treat me like this? I'm also your daughter. The middle-aged man with a gentle and handsome appearance looked at the girl in front of him with a cold gaze, her face becoming increasingly pale. He spoke calmly, Nian is your sister. Didn't you say you were willing to pay for her? If sacrificing a daughter can bring back a great fortune, then what reason does he have to refuse? The little light left in the girl's eyes slowly faded away, leaving only a bone-deep hatred, wishing to tear apart the cold and ruthless father and daughter in front of her. But now she doesn't even have the strength to struggle. Zhi'an looked at Zhian, who was no longer able to speak, and smiled, her beautiful and refined face tinged with a hint of bloodthirsty cruelty due to this smile. In her past life, Zhian was an extremely noble empress, while she was only the wife of a 6th-rank petty official. Why? As both daughters of the Gu family, why can Zhian step on her head and enjoy endless glory, while she has to live a miserable life in a small house? Life is over again, and at the moment she wakes up, she swears that she will take back everything that Zhian has, and all the honors that should belong to her, are extremely precious. Zhian no longer looked at the dying Zhian and turned his head to ask Wuchenzi, who was standing at the other end of the formation, Taoist, will her fortune and destiny belong to me? In his past life, the reason why Zhian was able to marry into the Eastern Palace and eventually ascend to the throne was related to a sentence from Abbot Kongyuan. At that time, she and Zhian went to Yunlong Temple to offer incense. The old monk Kongyuan looked at their sisters from a distance and said to people around him, "The girl in purple has a very expensive life and unparalleled luck. She is the reincarnation of a god phoenix." These words quickly spread and entered the palace. Shortly after, His Majesty issued an edict to grant marriage, and Zhian was promoted to the position of crown princess from the daughter of a minor official. Wuchenzi stared at the formation diagram without even lifting his eyelids, and only said lightly, "This ebbs and flows, she dies, and you thrive." Before Zhian's death, he heard this sentence. "This fades and another grows, she dies, and you thrive." Unmarked common graves. Zhian, who had been out of breath for a while, suddenly opened her eyes. She opened her mouth and wanted to breathe, but her neck seemed to be pinched by an invisible hand. No matter how hard she struggled, it was of no use. Seeing that he was about to die again, Zhian suddenly realized something and quickly raised his right hand, making a poisonous oath in his heart. "I will definitely avenge you, take back everything you have lost, let the wicked be executed, and the wicked pay for their lives." If you break this oath, you will not die easily. As the poisonous oath was sworn, the invisible force that held her neck suddenly loosened, and air poured into her mouth. She quickly took big breaths, ignoring how disgusting the stench filled the air. After regaining his composure, Zhian, as a special military doctor, quickly realized that something was wrong with this place. This is really a mass grave. Thinking of those invisible bacteria and even viruses, she quickly held her breath and crawled out until she was far away before daring to continue breathing. But with this breath, the stench on her body almost caused her to die in place. In a farm not far from the chaotic burial mound, Zhi'an sat in a bathtub, his face pale as paper, his eyebrows cut like ink, and his facial contours were sharp and angular. His eyes, deep as the sea, seemed to have no warmth, emitting a bloodthirsty and murderous aura all around him. The water in the bathtub had already run out of heat, and the servant who was supposed to be guarding the master at the door ran somewhere to avoid it. At this moment, there was a slight noise coming from the door. His eyes were sharp, and his cold gaze swept over him. "Don't you get in yet?" He let out a cold drink, and the temperature around him seemed to drop to freezing point, trembling with coldness. Zhian, who had just touched the door, was suddenly caught, right. "I'm here again. This time, I'm writing ancient sayings and passionate articles. If you like it, please remember to like and save it. Ah bah. Cross it out. If you like reading articles, please remember to vote and recommend it. Love you, Mommy." End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Your clothes belongs to me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Your clothes belongs to me. She had already seen the situation inside the room clearly. A man sat with his back to her in the bathtub, with 3 steps behind the tub. A small wooden table was placed beside the steps, and a pile of clothes was neatly stacked on top. The man in the room should have mistakenly thought she was a servant of Zhuangzi. Why didn't she take the opportunity to go in and steal clothes? Zhian's thoughts were beautiful, but reality was cruel. As soon as she entered the room, the man sitting in the bucket squinted his eyes slightly. When Zhian's hand reached out to the stack of clothes, one hand was faster than hers, directly gripping her slender neck. Zhian was shocked and quickly grabbed the man's wrist with both hands, trying to break free from the confinement. I thought it would take some effort. After all, this man looked very fierce and powerful, but to my surprise, she only struggled and her hand was thrown out as if it had no bones. "Are you poisoned?" Just now her hand happened to touch the man's wrist pulse, and that pulse was undoubtedly poisoned. Zhi'an's eyes were full of anger, and he laughed back angrily. "Send a woman who crawled out of the cesspool over here. What tricks do you want to play?" "What is it?" "Septic pit. This person looks like a dog. Why is his mouth so venomous?" Zhian glanced sideways at the room and sneered, "This is your shabby house. When the mice come, they have to bid farewell with tears in their eyes. What good can I get from my tricks? I'm just here to borrow a piece of clothing to wear." She began to take off her clothes, which smelled so bad that she had been suffocating. She didn't want to wear them for a moment. "What are you doing? You're reckless. Get out." The man was extremely angry, only hating that his hands were weak and unable to strike this shameless woman with one palm. "Don't worry, I'll get out of here right away. I'll lend you this dress to wear for 2 days, and I'll give you a new set another day." Zhian quickly took off his outer jacket, picked up the men's clothing on the wooden table, and put it on his body. Without waiting for the man to speak again, he turned around and walked out. Zhi'an's face was as cold as frost, and his eyes were filled with anger. Especially when he saw this woman, who was covered in a foul odor, shamelessly putting on his clothes in front of him. He wished he could strike him with one palm, even shattering everyone's clothes. Is it true that a tiger has been bullied by a dog in the face of its downfall? Nowadays, even a person dares to act recklessly in front of him. Do you really consider him a dead person? Zhian didn't know what the man behind her was thinking, only feeling a chill in her neck, but didn't think much. She lifted her foot and was about to step out, only to think of her penniless situation. Not to mention looking back at home to retrieve her life from that vicious father and daughter, she couldn't even afford the toll to the capital city gate. She withdrew her already stepped feet and turned back to the edge of the bathtub. She discussed with the man in the tub who couldn't see clearly, as the saying goes, if you help me to the end, why don't the young master lend me some more money? When I get out of trouble, I'll definitely get 10 times back. Chu Yuanyan suppressed his anger and didn't want anyone to see him looking so embarrassed that he could only be helpless and furious. He coldly uttered one word. Get lost. Gu Zhi'an raised an eyebrow. This person seemed angry, too. He was extremely poisonous, and the servants he served were nowhere to be found. He couldn't even get out of the bathtub, and he even met her, a thief who stole clothes. It's strange not to be angry. Gu Zhi'an felt a bit unbearable in her heart. Her feet, which had already stepped out of the threshold, retracted once again. She turned back to the edge of the bathtub and said to the man, I'll help you out. If you soak in cold water for too long, you'll die. Chu Yuanyan slowly opened his closed eyes, his handsome eyes narrowed slightly, and his guard almost overflowed in his eyes, but he did not immediately refuse. He really wants to go out, the taste of soaking in cold water is really uncomfortable. Seeing that the man did not refuse, Gu Zhi'an reached out his hand directly to the man and said, Come out. Chu Yuanyan fixed his gaze on the woman in front of him who couldn't see her face clearly due to the dim light. The woman's eyes were very bright, like stars in the dark night, shining brightly. After a while, he slowly reached out his hand, wrapped it around the woman's arm, and used his strength to come out of the bathtub. Even though the light was dim, it couldn't block the man's beautiful and impactful body that was right in front of her. Her eyes were about to burst out, and if it weren't for the limited amount of blood left in her body, her nose would definitely be splattering now. Chu Yuanyan is going crazy with anger. Is this woman treating him as dead? I dare to stare at him with such vulgar eyes in front of him, I really want to strangle this inexplicable and shameless woman. Have you seen enough? Chu Yuanyan almost gritted his teeth and said this sentence. Gu Zhi'an regained his composure and quickly glanced away, silently muttering to himself, I am not embarrassed, it is others who are embarrassed. On the wooden table beside the steps, there was only a set of men's undershirts left. Chu Yuanyan pulled on the clothes and slowly put them on, without looking at the woman beside him with a flurry of eyes. Feeling the low pressure emanating from the man's body, Gu Zhi'an took a few steps back from the window and thought of the poison on the man's body. He spoke again, I have a prescription in my hand, which may help you temporarily suppress the toxicity in your body and prevent the toxin from entering your heart for 10 days. Is it feasible for me to exchange this prescription for 10 taels of silver? End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Your silver money belongs to me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Your silver money belongs to me. Chu Yuanyan paused as he tied his clothes and turned his gaze towards the window. The girl stood straight, not in a graceful posture, but particularly pleasing to the eye. Perhaps this woman's posture was very similar to those of his soldiers. There were no lights in the room, and the light was indeed dim. Despite being several steps away, he could see the woman's eyes clearly. This inexplicable woman seemed to have a pair of extremely beautiful eyes, clear and bright. When he looked at him speaking, it seemed as if there were no impurities, and his tone was sincere, not fake. Seeing the man staring at her with cold eyes and not speaking, Gu Zhi'an felt uneasy and could only speak again, at the beginning, your poison only softens the muscles. After a few days, the poison will enter the bone marrow and cartilage the muscles. At that time, you can't even stand up and can only lie in bed like a rotten meat, being manipulated by others. This is not the most tragic thing. Gu Zhi paused for a moment and saw that the man had no response. She continued, the most tragic thing is that after 7 days, the poison will enter your heart and veins, but it will not kill you immediately. Instead, it will gradually corrupt your internal organs, causing you to suffer the most severe torture, comparable to Ling Qi. TSK 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 TS Chu Yuanyan stared at her with cold eyes, tugging at the corner of his lips. You're so amazing, why don't you just give me a prescription that can detoxify you? Gu Zhian pretended not to recognize his weird and ironic tone, and was not upset. He just shrugged his shoulders and said, your poison is extraordinary. You can't detoxify it by drinking medicine alone. You need to take it internally and take a bath outside, and then use acupuncture and moxibustion to remove the toxin. It seems that you and I are in a bad situation now, and the detoxification should wait until you get out of trouble. She finally understood that this man had been poisoned and locked up in this small village to fend for himself. It's hard to say if he can survive for 10 days. After Gu Zhian finished speaking, regardless of whether the man believed it or not, he turned around and walked to the desk by the window. He picked up his pen in the moonlight and wrote a prescription. If you don't have any silver, just give it to Feng Zichuan. Let's assume he's paying for this outfit. She thrust the prescription into the man's hand, turned around, and walked away. Just as she crossed the threshold, something flew from behind. She quickly avoided it and didn't dare to reach out and grab it casually. She watched helplessly as the sparkling jade ring fell to the ground. If you take this item to Linglong Pavilion, you can exchange it for 1,000 taels. Gu Zhian picked up the jade ring, which was warm and moist, making it an excellent object. But she wasn't very happy. She just glanced meaningfully at the man in the chair, smiled, and said, deal. This person is cunning. With just one ring, they can both pay off debts and use her to convey messages, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. But her advantage is not easy to take advantage of. Gu Mansion. Since returning from a rural farm in the suburbs of Beijing, Gu Zhiyan, who was originally extremely energetic, suddenly vomited blood and fell to the ground, convulsing uncontrollably, and his whole body seemed to be suffering from epilepsy. Not only her, but also the accompanying Taoist Wuchenzi vomited blood and meditated for a while before regaining his composure. Wuchenzi immediately sent someone to inspect Gu Zhian's body, but the body disappeared without a trace. The Gu family was overwhelmed for a moment, and the police station had manpower to send out. They searched all night, but couldn't even find a trace. At this moment, Gu Zhiyan's condition became even worse, sometimes with angina causing him to cry and howl, and sometimes with convulsions and foaming at his mouth. Gu Qingfeng, who had just returned from outside, arrived at his daughter Gu Zhiyan's room at the first time. Seeing that her daughter had been tortured into this ghostly appearance in just one night, he felt both anxious and resentful in his heart. He quickly asked Wuchenzi on the side, Taoist, what is the current situation with Nian Nian? End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Your destiny belongs to me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Your destiny belongs to me. Wuchenzi's face was also very unhappy. He didn't expect such a mistake to happen. Even if he confirmed that he had died, he could still be resurrected. This shows that the girl's fate is not only extremely expensive, but also extremely hard. If she doesn't die, even if she only leaves one breath, the secret of exchanging life and taking blessings cannot be considered a complete success. Failure means backlash. Not only will those who receive blessings suffer backlash, but he, as a spellcaster, will also suffer backlash. People haven't died yet, so the method of changing lives to seize blessings has naturally not been achieved. Wuchenzi's tone was very unpleasant, and he didn't even glance at Gu Qingfeng. I really blame the Gu family for their unstable behavior. If it weren't for the fact that the Gu family's servants were greedy for that little coffin money, the girl wouldn't have had a chance to escape even if she hadn't died completely. Upon hearing this, Gu Qingfeng immediately turned his head and asked the beautiful woman guarding the bed, "Madam, haven't you found her yet?" Jin Chuanyang shook her head, her beautiful face covered in tears, her apricot eyes turning red, and her delicate appearance of pear blossoms with rain. She looked even more pitiful than Gu Jinyan, who was suffering from backlash. Gu Qingfeng loved this trick the most, and what he couldn't see the most was the sad and crying appearance of Jin Chuanyang. He took 2 steps forward, ignoring the presence of others in the room. He reached out and took Jin Chuanyang into his arms, comforting her gently, "It's okay. If I send more people to find her, I will definitely find that dead girl." Jin Chuanyang gently nodded in front of her husband's chest, her weak and unable to take care of herself, which made Gu Qingfeng feel heartbroken. Jin Chuanyang is actually very uncertain in her heart. She is not as optimistic as Gu Qingfeng. The mansion has sent so many people all over, searching through the suburbs of Beijing, but she hasn't even found a single person. She pressed the handkerchief around the corner of her eyes and gently pulled it out of Gu Qingfeng's arms. She turned her head to look at Wu Chenzi and asked, "Taoist, if you can't find that girl all along, is there any other way to help Nian Nian complete the secret technique of changing her life and taking good fortune?" This was a question that hit the nail on the head, and Zhi'an had been thinking about it all along. At this moment, a dark light gathered in his half-lowered eyes, and his entire demeanor seemed to have changed in that moment. Finally, he had reached this point. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there was already a slight smile on his face. The method is not without it, it's just. Faced with a pause in the words of Wu Chenzi, Gu Qingfeng immediately expressed his opinion, "Don't worry, Taoist. No matter what method or price you have to pay, I can bear it. As long as you can recite it well, the sky-shattering wealth and prosperity will be right in front of you. What's the point of giving?" Wu Chenzi nodded in satisfaction, and all he wanted was his words, "That's great." September 15th. Gu Jinyan on the bed suddenly spoke out, panting and coughing with a pale face. At this moment, she was so weak that she couldn't even finish a sentence in one breath. Jin Chuanyang quickly helped her daughter, constantly stroking her back and asking softly, "Nian Nian, what's wrong with September 15th?" Gu Jinyan tightly gripped her chest and clothes, feeling pain as if she had been pricked by countless needles. She held her breath and continued, "Before September 15th, we must do this." On September 15th, it was the day when she and Gu Zhi'an went to Yunlong Temple to offer incense in their previous lives. On that day, rumors spread from Master Kongyuan that Gu Zhi'an was a destined daughter and a reincarnation of the divine phoenix. From that day on, Gu Zhi'an embarked on the path to the peak of Qingyun. This time, Gu Jinyan wants to be the destined daughter and must not make any mistakes. Wu Chenzi narrowed her eyes slightly, fixed her gaze on Gu Jinyan for a few breaths, and finally spoke slowly, "As you wish." Gu Qingfeng escorted Wu Chenzi away, leaving only Jin Chuanyang and Gu Jinyan's mother and daughter in the room. Gu Jinyan endured the excruciating pain of a knife cut on her chest and tightly grasped Jin Chuanyang's hand. "Mother, Gu Zhi'an cannot live, she absolutely cannot live, otherwise I will die." End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Your girl belongs to me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Your girl belongs to me. Jin Chuanyang nodded with tears in her eyes and said, "Nian Nian, don't worry, I will definitely handle this matter for you. Even if that little slut escapes to the horizon, I will catch her back and let her die in front of you." Gu Jinyan doesn't trust anyone, including Gu Qingfeng, who is always obedient to her. After all, that slut is also Gu Qingfeng's daughter. Who knows if he will temporarily soften his heart and save her life. As if thinking of something else, Gu Jinyan grabbed Jin Chuanyang's hand and urgently asked, "Mom, is it August 8th today?" In his past life, on the 8th day of the 8th month of the 8th lunar month, a major event occurred. The young prince of the Rongqing prince's mansion went missing and was found dead on the street. It is said that he was beaten to death by two beggars and died outside the Linglong pavilion. Jin Chuanyang's eyes lit up and she quickly nodded. Today is the 8th day of the 8th lunar month. Did you dream again? What did you dream about this time? Gu Xinyan glanced at the sky outside and breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that it was still early. Mother, hurry up and take someone to Linglong Pavilion. Make sure to go outside Linglong Pavilion before noon. If you see a beggar beating a child, you must save that child. Mother, you must go in person and bring that child back. Prince Rong is the younger brother of the current Holy One Mother's compatriots, the youngest son held by the Empress Dowager at the tip of her heart, and the only legitimate son of the Prince Rong's mansion. If the Prince Rong's mansion can accept her great favor, she will be able to take over the East Palace in the future. Asterisk, as the saying goes, the most dangerous place is the safest place. When the Gu family thought that Gu Zhi'an had fled to the horizon, he quietly returned to Kyoto City. Linglong Pavilion. Gu Zhi'an was dressed in men's clothing, with some disguise on her face. With a straight figure and bold steps, no one noticed that she was a woman. She walked through the counter with exquisite jewelry and walked straight to the innermost counter. She reached out to the shopkeeper who was playing with the abacus and said, "Shopkeeper, do you take this?" Manager Lu was busy, and upon hearing these words, he didn't even lift his eyelids, regardless of who came. He waved his hand and said, "Go to the pawn shop as something. Don't you take a glance." Gu Zhi'an still reached out his hand, and the sparkling green ring in his tender palm was particularly eye-catching. Manager Lu stopped using his abacus and looked up at the hand of Bai Xingsheng. As his gaze touched the ring in the palm of the hand, his face suddenly changed. He quickly looked up at the incoming person and saw that it was an inexperienced newcomer. His heart sank uncontrollably. "Young master, this ring looks good. How much do you plan to spend on it?" Gu Zhi'an smiled slightly, his fingers slowly closed, and he said directly, "That person told me to come to Linglong Pavilion with this. You can exchange it for 1,000 coins. Manager Lu stared at the unfamiliar face in front of him, appearing calm on the surface, but stirring up turbulent waves in his heart. This ring is an item that the master never leaves his hands on, and it is a relic of his deceased mother. It appears here at this time, indicating the danger of the master's situation at this time. This way, please." Manager Lu gestured and immediately several figures silently emerged from the darkness, each occupying a position, fully alert. Gu Zhi'an ignored it and leisurely followed Manager Lu up the second floor. After entering the elegant room on the second floor, two men in black and strong attire immediately guarded outside the door. Although the shopkeeper Lu was extremely anxious, he bowed to Gu Zhi'an several times before speaking. 1,000 taels of gold will be delivered later. Please let me know the whereabouts of my master, young master. Gu Zhi'an shook his head and hooked his lips. Besides 1,000 taels of gold, I have one more request. Manager Lu suppressed his impatience and said in a deep voice, "Young master, please speak up." Gu Zhi'an found a chair to sit down on, glanced at the simple and low-key decorations in the room, and smiled slightly. "To be honest with the shopkeeper, my situation is not very good now. I should have been far away from Kyoto City, but there are also some things that I have to do. I can't stand alone. How can my fists match my 4 hands? It's really difficult to move a single step." Upon hearing this, Manager Lu immediately understood and asked, "How many people do you want, young master?" Gu Zhi'an cast an appreciative gaze at the shopkeeper. This person was quick-witted and agile in his actions, making him an excellent choice for a right-hand man. Unfortunately, she extended 2 fingers and said, "I only borrow 2 girls with excellent martial arts skills." End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Your luck belongs to me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Your luck belongs to me. Manager Lu's face has slightly changed. Do you want a maid? He squinted his eyes and carefully looked at the young man in front of him. Sure enough, he noticed some clues. The young man was actually dressed as a man, no wonder he wanted a girl. Gu Zhian saw that shopkeeper Lu did not readily agree and thought he was considering it, so he spoke up again, don't think my demands are excessive. Your master is not in a good situation now, and he is extremely poisonous. Manager Lu's face changed greatly, and Gu Zhian said again, it's a coincidence. I've studied medicine for a few years, and I can cure the poison. Now my life is your master's life, so you should think you've sent 2 people to protect me. Manager Lu was extremely anxious, knowing that this was not the time to worry about the true or false gains and losses. As long as there was a clue, he could not let it go. Okay, I'll arrange it right away. After Lu finished speaking, the shopkeeper turned around and went out, but a pillar of incense came back. Behind him were 2 tall and delicate women, both around 16 or 17 years old, who were very suitable for Gu Zhian's appearance and age, but they didn't know how good the martial arts were. Manager Lu is a person with a clear mind, and he can tell the meaning from Gu Zhian's eyes. He immediately asked the 2 girls to show their skills to the new master. The slender girl in green clothes stepped forward and saluted respectfully, I am a servant with a red tassel, skilled in lightness skills and hidden weapons like flying knives. She shook her hand and 2 silver beams flew out from her sleeve, quickly, accurately, and fiercely nailed to a calligraphy in painting on the opposite wall. The 2 exquisite flying knives were nailed with the characters red and tassel. Gu Zhian secretly cheered in his heart, but remained calm on his face as he turned his gaze to another girl. The girl in an apricot-colored dress had a slightly plump figure, a round face with curved eyebrows, and a very pleasing appearance. She stepped forward and bowed to Gu Zianfu, saying with a smile, Lang Qiao, am good at close combat. After speaking, she walked to a wooden table and raised her hand to lightly chop it, causing the ancient and heavy wooden table to break into pieces. Gu Zhian has been working hard to control his facial expression, but the hidden joy in his eyes cannot be concealed. Great, you'll follow me from now on. Before her luck and destiny are completely regained, she could be in danger at any time due to the weakening of her luck. With these 2 girls by her side, the chances of success are also higher. Manager Lu was very discerning and presented 2 body deeds and 1,000 taels of gold and silver bills to Gu Zhian. After a pillar of incense, several black shadows left Linglong Pavilion in all directions, all heading in one direction. Gu Zhian walked slowly out of Linglong Pavilion with 2 women, Hongying and Lang Qiao. As soon as he left, he heard a burst of shouting and cursing. Lang Qiao glanced at Gu Zhian and whispered, 2 beggars are bullying a child. Gu Zhian turned his head and saw a dirty little boy, 7 or 8 years old, lying on the ground. In front of him were 2 tall beggars, holding sticks and showing a cruel and ferocious smile on his face. With just one glance, Gu Zhian could confirm that these 2 people were not real beggars, nor were they just bullying children, but rather wanting the child's life. Red tassels. Gu Zhian spoke. She is not the Virgin Mary, but as a soldier, she cannot watch a child being killed in front of her without doing anything. Even without Hongying and Lang Qiao by her side, she wouldn't sit idly by. Hongying understood and threw 2 flying knives, quickly, accurately, and fiercely piercing the hands of 2 beggars holding sticks. The stick fell to the ground, and before the 2 beggars could react, Lang Qiao's foot had already kicked them. After 2 screams, there was no sound. Gu Zhian walked up to the boy and realized that his left leg was in an unnatural bent state, which should have been broken. Although the boy had a white face and red eyes, he never cried and gritted his lips, his eyes full of caution as he looked at her. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Your identity belongs to me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Your identity belongs to me, although I'm afraid, my sister is not a bad person. After saying that, she asked Lang Qiao to find 2 wooden boards and make a simple fixation for the boy before speaking again, where is your home? I'll take you home. The boy still gritted his lips and remained silent, obviously not slacking off his guard against her at all. Gu Zhian had no choice but to ask Hongying to take the boy to a nearby medical clinic and leave some medical fees and living expenses, which was considered as his best effort. As soon as Gu Zhian left with his people, the Gu family's carriage arrived. The outside of Linglong Pavilion is peaceful, there is no such thing as beggars bullying children. Jin Chuanyang naturally believed in what her daughter said to her. If her daughter said there was, then there must be. Just wait a little longer. But this time, it was just an hour. Noon had already passed, and I didn't see any beggars or children at all. Gu mansion. Upon learning that the young prince had not been saved, Gu Zhian was so angry that he vomited blood on the spot, and the situation became even worse. In just one day, Gu Zhian's face had lost a circle of weight, her beautiful eyes had become dull and lifeless. In the basin next to the bed was the blood she had just spat out, and her face was even whiter with a hint of gray, no different from the dying person on the brink of death. Jin Chuanyang cried so much that her eyes were swollen like walnuts. She stood by the bed and didn't dare to leave even a step. Seeing her daughter coughing up another mouthful of blood, she couldn't help but shout to Gu Qingfeng, who was constantly pacing restlessly in the room, "Master, come up with a solution. Nian can't hold on anymore." Gu Qingfeng's heart was also burning with anxiety, but Taoist Wuchenzi said that to suppress the backlash of chanting, it was necessary to sacrifice the blood of the girl's heart with the 3-yin body. However, the girl with these 3-yin body is not so easy to find. At this moment, the maidservant ran in and said to Gu Qingfeng and Jin Chuanyang, "Master, Madam, Manager Cui said there is something important to report." "Let him in." Gu Qingfeng waved his hand. Steward Cui quickly came in and was so scared that he let out a hiccup when he saw Miss Eyre on the bed, who was neither human nor ghost. "What's important?" Gu Qingfeng asked impatiently. "Master, someone is causing trouble at the door, saying that the young lady has broken the treasure of their shop. Let's quickly take the money to redeem the person." Gu Qingfeng's face changed and he turned to grab onto the collar of Butler Cui. "Who are you talking about, Mississippi?" When did Cui, the butler, see the master's fierce appearance? He was so frightened that his heart trembled. He quickly nodded and said, "Yes." Upon receiving a positive answer, Gu Qingfeng's stern expression between his eyebrows and eyes faded, and he turned to look at Jin Chuanyang, who had the same surprised expression. "Chuanyang, did you hear me?" Jin Chuanyang nodded repeatedly and said, "Master, hurry up and bring that scumbag. Bring in and back as soon as possible." With the good news of this day, even Gu Zhian, whose face turned pale and haggard, regained a hint of vitality in his eyes. As long as he caught her good sister and drained her blood, all crises would be easily resolved. Sure enough, the heavens are still on her side. Gu Qingfeng hurriedly rushed to the entrance of the mansion. At this time, many people had gathered outside to watch the excitement. Among them, 2 young people dressed as assistants were vividly telling the situation at that time, and the people around were also listening attentively. They occasionally sighed and said it was a pity. "Where is the person?" Gu Qingfeng approached and grabbed one of the assistant's arms, his face gloomy, and he shouted sternly. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Your silver note belongs to me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Your silver note belongs to me. The guy was startled and said, "Are you Mr. Gu?" Miss Gu said her father loves her very much and will definitely use silver money to redeem her and bring her back to the mansion. How come I don't look too alike? A person next to him who understood the situation smiled and leaned in, saying, "You don't know that, right? Miss Gu was born by Lady Gu, and now Lady Gu is Miss Gu's stepmother. As the saying goes, with a stepmother, there is a stepfather, and this is absolutely true." The people around who were unaware of the truth all had a sudden realization on their faces. It turned out to be their stepfather. "No wonder he looks like he's going to eat people." Someone spoke up again, the treasure of Zhian in Zhenbao Pavilion costs a lot of silver. Can this stepfather be willing to pay for this money? Someone said, Mr. Gu is just a 6th grade official, right? The treasure of the town shop costs 18,000 taels of silver. Can Mr. Gu take it out? Someone once again said, you are ignorant and ignorant. Mr. Gu has plenty of money, but what is this? Do you know who Miss Gu's biological mother is? She is the only daughter of the richest man in Jiangnan. When she married Mr. Gu, who was only a Zhi'an, she brought more than 10 miles of dowry. The veins on Gu Qingfeng's forehead were bulging, and a sense of unease arose in his heart. Not many people knew about these old stories, and even if someone knew, they wouldn't point them out in public. But now, someone deliberately said this in public. What are they trying to do? Without waiting for him to find the person who was stirring up trouble in the crowd, the staff member of the treasure pavilion spoke up, Lord Gu, Miss Gu has broken the treasure of our treasure pavilion's shop. This has been seen by many people, and Miss Gu herself admits it. She also asked Lord Gu to bring 18,000 taels of silver with me to redeem the person at the treasure pavilion. The shopkeeper said, if you don't go, we can only send Miss Gu to the government for legal action. 18,000 taels. Gu Qingfeng only felt liver pain and even his heart was dripping blood. But at this moment, he had no room for bargaining, let alone for the dead girl to be sent to see the official. Nian was still waiting for her to save his life. Steward Chui, go find the old lady, Gu Qingfeng said. Although Chuanyang is in charge of the feedbacks in the mansion, most of the dowry left by He Wan is held in the hands of the old lady. Chuanyang doesn't have much to do with it. For such a large expenditure of 18,000 taels, it's useless to find Chuanyang. You still need to find an old man. Steward Chui returned soon, with a bad expression on his face, indicating that he had been quite angry, but he finally received the silver ticket. Without saying a word, Gu Qingfeng rushed to the treasure pavilion with his silver ticket. Gu Qingfeng thought he would meet Gu Zhian in the treasure pavilion, who described him as disheveled and miserable. After all, he had broken the treasure of the Zhian store in the treasure pavilion, and no matter what, he wouldn't have a good face to show her. Perhaps he had already been beaten up. But what he saw was Gu Zhian sitting in the VIP room, dressed in fresh clothes and enjoying tea elegantly, chatting and laughing with the shopkeeper of the treasure pavilion. If it weren't for the bandage wrapped around her wrist, he would have thought that the girl in front of him was not Gu Zhian. Gu Qingfeng suddenly remembered a sentence that Taoist Wuchenzi had said when he was using the secret technique of exchanging lives and taking blessings. This one fades and another grows, she dies and you thrive. So, what if the situation is the opposite? No wonder Nian has become like that now, and the reason behind it all lies in Gu Zhian. Only when she completely disappears can Nian return to normal, and even fully possess the fortune and destiny that originally belonged to Gu Zhian. Gu Qingfeng's fierce and murderous intent in his eyes was not concealed at all. In his opinion, this daughter deserves to die. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Your courtyard belongs to me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Your courtyard belongs to me. Is this Mr. Gu? Manager Su, who was having a great conversation with Gu Zhian, stood up and asked Gu Qingfeng, who had entered the VIP room. Gu Qingfeng nodded slightly and didn't intend to say anything more. He directly instructed the attendant behind him, take the silver ticket to the shopkeeper. Manager Su raised his eyebrows slightly, and his smile gradually deepened. As Miss Zhian said, Mr. Gu didn't know the whole story, he would only give money readily. 18,000 taels, Gu Qingfeng tried his best not to look at the stack of silver notes that had already reached someone else's hands. He suppressed his anger and scanned Gu Zhian with a cold gaze, saying calmly, go back to your mansion. Gu Zhian stood up and said to Manager Su, I apologize for what happened today. I will come to the door another day to apologize. Manager Su waved his hand repeatedly and said, no need, it's not necessary. Miss, it was also a careless mistake. Lord Gu also sent compensation, so why apologize? Gu Qingfeng looked coldly at the polite interactions between the two of them, and then thought of the 18,000 taels of silver bills. He couldn't help but snort heavily. Are you still not leaving? Gu Zhian gave a glance to Hong Ying and left behind Gu Qingfeng with only Lang Qiao. A carriage has been prepared outside the treasure pavilion, with Gu Qingfeng and Gu Zhian and Lang Qiao sitting in one. Halfway through the car, Hong Ying caught up and handed a small redwood box to Gu Zhian. The box contains 9,000 taels of silver notes that have just been obtained from Manager Su. Lang Qiao took the box and counted the silver bills several miles away, laughing uncontrollably. If Mr. Gu finds out that you are colluding with Manager Su to cheat on his silver, he might be so angry that he will vomit blood. Gu Zhian tugged at the corner of his lips, drawing a hint of mockery. What's this silver? What belongs to me, I will make them all spit it out. After finishing speaking, he looked at Hong Ying again and said, has the letter I wrote been delivered? Hong Ying nodded and said, it's sent out. The escort agency says it will take about 6 or 7 days to arrive in Jiangnan. During the idle conversation, the carriage stopped and a man's shout came from outside, Miss, here we are. Hong Ying got off the car first and stood by the frame to curtain Gu Zhian. Lang Qiao carried a bundle in one hand and helped Gu Zhian out of the carriage with the other. The carriage stopped outside the side door of Gu Mansion, and Gu Qingfeng had already taken the first step in. 2 servants of various sizes stood on the side waiting to pick up the person, while several guards stood not far away watching. Gu Zhian jumped off the carriage with Lang Qiao's arm, not looking at the 2 servants, and walked straight into the door. The 2 servants saw that she was about to enter, so they didn't take any action and just followed closely behind. As soon as Gu Zhian entered the door, he heard the sound of the wooden door slamming shut from behind. Then 2 servants rushed forward and blocked her way, saying, Miss, I have offended you. Gu Zhian looked curious and ignorant, what have you offended? The 2 servants didn't say much nonsense and reached out to grab Gu Zhian's arm. The lady instructed them to take the person to Miss Eyre's courtyard as soon as possible without any delay. However, the hands of the 2 servants had not yet touched the corner of Gu Zhian's clothes when they were kicked away one by a round-faced girl. It really flew up and then fell heavily, causing 2 servants to see stars in their eyes. Well done. Gu Zhian gave Lang Qiao a thumbs up as he listened to the screams of, oh oh oh. The several guards who were originally guarding in the distance quickly surrounded when they saw the situation, but there was no match for Lang Qiao. However, in 3 or 5 attacks, they beat 7 or 8 fierce guards to the ground, and Hong Ying remained by Gu Zhian's side, unable to make a move. Gu Zhian smiled like a victorious little rooster, carrying a red tassel and Lang Qiao, and swaggered towards the courtyard where he used to live. The situation here quickly spread to the courtyard where Gu Zhian was located. At this moment, Gu Qingfeng had just sat down, his buttocks had not heated up, and he had not even taken a sip of tea before a servant came to report the matter. Upon hearing this, Gu Qingfeng was furious and slapped the coffee table with a palm. The hot tea overturned and half a cup of tea poured onto the back of his hand, causing him to jump up like a monkey, showing his teeth and shaking his hands. Jin Chuanyang was startled and quickly approached to examine the injury. She saw blisters on the back of her hand and panicked to find the ointment. Gu Qingfeng waved his hand and said, it's okay, I'll go and catch that unfilial and rebellious girl first. After saying this, he looked at Gu Zhian on the bed, who was neither human nor ghostly, and his voice was extremely gentle. Nian Nian, Daddy, go and bring that rebellious girl. You'll be fine soon. Gu Zhian nodded forcefully, tears streaming down his eyes. It wasn't that much that moved him, it was just joy. That little slut actually brought him to his door, which was indeed fate's will. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Your dowry belongs to me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Your dowry belongs to me. Gu Qingfeng hurried towards the courtyard where Gu Zhi'an was located, and sent someone else to invite Taoist Wuchenzi to come over. Anlin Courtyard. Gu Zhi'an looked at the familiar courtyard in his memory, and many images flashed through his mind. Since childhood, Ginchen has lived in this small courtyard, and the maids around him were arranged by Jin Chuanyang. Under Jin Chuanyang's guidance, Ginchen has been raised to be particularly timid. When spoken well, it is called quiet and elegant, but when spoken poorly, it is called cowardice and timidity. The original self is not foolish, and many things can be seen clearly. It is only because of his cowardly nature that he repeatedly forgave and eventually ended up in such a situation. Hongying and Langqiao were very agile in their work and quickly tidied up the room. She rested under the pergola in the courtyard, drank tea, and Hongying stood by to fan and repel mosquitoes. Langqiao then went into the small kitchen, preparing to make some food. At this moment, there were scattered footsteps coming from outside. Gu Zhi'an opened his eyes and let out a soft sigh. I really don't have time for a moment, she glanced at Hongying. Since they insist on finding someone uncomfortable, don't be polite to these people later. Hongying smiled and nodded. It's been a long time since she had such a good time. Today is really a good day. The closed courtyard door was kicked open by someone. First, two tall and sturdy guards entered, followed by Gu Qingfeng, and then two domestic servants holding sticks and ropes. Gu Zhi'an sat motionless in the rattan chair, as the fine sunlight passing through the rattan leaves fell on her slightly pale face, illuminating the delicate and fine fur behind her ears. Her beautiful eyes sparkled with light, and the slightly sickly pale corners of her lips carried a hint of sarcasm. Looking at Gu Qingfeng's eyes, there was a sharp insight into the heart. Gu Qingfeng was stunned. In that moment, he thought he had seen He-Wan-Wan, who had looked at him with the same gaze 16 years ago. In front of He-Wan-Wan's gaze, he felt as if he had been stripped naked and left on the street to be watched by others, so he despised He-Wan-Wan, hated He-Wan-Wan, and wished she would die immediately. Fortunately, she died. In front of him was He-Wan-Wan's daughter, a girl he had never seen with a straight eye before, who dared to look at him with such eyes. Tie it up. Cold words spewed out from his mouth, devoid of any emotion, as if the girl in front of him was not his flesh and blood, but an enemy with deep blood and hatred towards him. The caregiver rushed forward and reached out his claws with a clear goal towards the girl sitting in the chair. Hongying had already pinched two flying knives in her hand, but did not throw them out. Instead, she quickly stabbed forward with her hands like lightning, and the two sharp small knives pierced the wrists of the two guards with great precision, splattering blood. Gu Qingfeng didn't even have time to be surprised. The fierce guards and several servants standing in front and behind him all collapsed. From beginning to end, Gu Zhi'an sat leisurely in a rattan chair, drinking tea and watching a play. Gu Qingfeng was frightened by Hongying's methods and took several steps back. He pointed at Gu Zhi'an with a stern expression and cursed, "Rebel girl, you are disrespectful and act recklessly. It's completely lawless." Gu Zhi'an put down his teacup and looked up at Gu Qingfeng, who was furious. "According to what you said, I should sit here waiting for you to kill and cut me. This is filial piety." Gu Qingfeng snorted coldly and said, "You are my daughter. I gave birth to you and raised you. Your life was all given by me, and now I just want you to return it. You should bear it well." Listening to these shameless words, even Hongying, who had always been cold-tempered, almost couldn't control her temper and flew over with a knife, resulting in this guy's life. Gu Zhi'an's face remained unchanged, with only a hint of mockery in his voice. "My mother gave birth to me, and the money she raised me was a dowry brought by my mother from her maternal family. Even the expenses of the entire Gu family, from top to bottom, were all brought by my mother. It was you who should repay the debt." She smiled, regardless of how ugly Gu Qingfeng's face was. Continuing, he said, "After my mother goes, all the dowry left by her should belong to me according to the laws of Zhian. I wonder when my father plans to return my mother's dowry to me. End of this chapter.